The wind was brisk that afternoon, but I was sweating through my shirt, not because of the chill but because of the work. I had just finished hauling the last piece of our marriage bed out onto the lawn, right by the curb where it could rot or be taken, whichever happened first. The queen-sized mattress sagged awkwardly between the two signs I'd hammered into the grass. One sign listed the specifications of the bed: queen size, good condition, if you can ignore the stench of betrayal. The other was more personal. Too personal. It said, "This is the bed where my wife spent 6 months screwing her boss. Free to anyone who doesn't mind sharing it with ghosts." Behind me, our kitchen table stood in similar disgrace, with another sign explaining how it, too, had been defiled. Same with the throw rug. I arranged the photos carefully, making sure the most compromising ones. Her legs wrapped around him, their faces locked in lust, were displayed prominently. If they were going to strip me of my dignity, I figured it was only fair I do the same to them. 4:57 p.m. Sherry would be home any minute. I wiped my hands on my jeans, stepped back, and surveyed my handiwork. Cars slowed as they passed by, some drivers gawking at the display while others snapped photos. A group of nosy neighbors had gathered, whispering among themselves. Good. Let them talk. Let them judge. Sherry wanted to play games? I was done playing nice. The roar of her car turning the corner yanked me out of my thoughts. Her sleek black sedan slowed as she noticed the crowd. Then her eyes caught the pile of furniture on the lawn, the signs, and finally me, standing at the window with my arms crossed. Our gazes locked. Even from that distance, I could see the horror dawning on her face, the way her complexion drained of color as tears welled in her eyes. She mouthed something, "No, no, no," and hit the brakes so hard the car lurched forward. A sick part of me reveled in it. The devastation, the collapse of her perfect little world. I turned away, pulling the curtains shut. I hadn't always been this bitter. Once, Sherry and I were the kind of couple you envied. We met during college, introduced by a mutual friend. I still remember the way her laugh sounded that night, like she had stars in her throat. She wasn't conventionally gorgeous, but she had this energy, this magnetic pull that made it impossible to look away. I was hooked. We married after graduation and built a life that, by all accounts, should have been solid. I started my own electronics business, and Sherry excelled in real estate. We bought a cozy condo, adopted a dog, and talked about having kids. Things weren't perfect, but I thought we were happy, until the cracks started showing. First, it was the late nights at the office. Then, the work trips that seemed to pop up out of nowhere. I told myself I was overthinking it, that Sherry loved me and would never betray me. But love isn't blind. It's stupid. It's a fool's game. I only realized the truth when I came across the text messages on her phone, hidden under a folder labeled Work Notes. It wasn't just infidelity. It was a full-blown affair. Her boss, Greg Allen, had been in our house, eating at our kitchen table and sleeping in our bed. The same bed I was now offering to anyone willing to take it off my hands. I spent days crafting the perfect revenge. Not because I thought it would fix anything, but because I needed Sherry to feel even a fraction of the humiliation she dealt me. As I heard her car door slam and the frantic shuffle of her heels approaching the house, I prepared myself for what came next. This wasn't the end, it was only the beginning. But in that moment, I felt ready to burn everything down. Sherry's fists pounded on the door. "Jack, open the door. Please." I leaned against the wall in the hallway, arms crossed, listening to her muffled sobs on the other side. Each plea was like a knife twisting deeper, but I wasn't about to let her see me bleed. Not today. I wasn't ready to face her, not while the sting of betrayal still pulsed like a fresh wound. "Jack, please." Her voice cracked, the desperation cutting through the wood like a blade. "We need to talk. Just open the door." I slid down to the floor, staring blankly at the scuffed hardwood. We had installed this floor together, arguing over the right stain color for weeks before finally agreeing on oak. Back then, the biggest problem in our marriage was deciding between warm honey and classic chestnut. Now, I was trying to figure out how to breathe without shattering into a million pieces. I heard the crowd outside murmuring as Sherry sobbed, probably taking in the sight of the woman of the hour. Disgraced, humiliated, and ruined. If she was embarrassed, good. I wanted her to feel small, like she had stripped away my worth when she opened her legs for Greg. The banging stopped. Silence. I waited, listening for her next move. Suddenly, her footsteps retreated down the porch stairs. I peeked out the front window just in time to see her climbing into the driver's seat. She was still crying, wiping at her cheeks furiously, like she could erase the mess she'd made. But instead of driving away, she sat there, motionless. Her phone pressed against her ear, probably calling someone for backup. Great. Just what I needed. A team of damage control experts swooping in to convince me I was overreacting. I stood up, my legs shaky beneath me, and grabbed a beer from the fridge. It was still early, but what the hell? My life had gone up in flames, so why not fuel the fire? Cracking it open, I took a long sip and let the bitterness coat my tongue. As I leaned against the kitchen counter, my mind raced back to the night I discovered her betrayal. I hadn't been snooping. I wasn't the jealous type. But when your wife suddenly starts guarding her phone like it holds nuclear launch codes, even a fool catches on eventually. She had been in the shower when I found the folder on her phone. Work notes, it said. Goo. Inside were dozens of messages, some of them mundane, others making me want to puke. The worst one wasn't even sexual, it was emotional. I'm starting to think I've never really loved anyone the way I love you, Greg. That was the one that did it. The one that made me drop her phone like it had burned me. Physical cheating was bad, sure. But emotional? That cut deeper. I didn't confront her right away. I spent days in a fog, spiraling between rage and heartbreak. One minute, I wanted to pack my bags and leave without a word. The next, I wanted to scream in her face until she understood what she had done to me. But in the end, I settled on something more calculated. Something cruel. Now, standing in the kitchen with the bitter taste of beer and betrayal on my tongue, I wondered if I'd gone too far. Before I could drown in my thoughts, a knock at the back door jolted me. I wasn't expecting anyone, but the way my life was going, it wouldn't surprise me if it was the police, here to arrest me for disturbing the peace. I opened the door and froze. It wasn't the police. It was Greg Allen, the man who had wrecked my marriage, standing on my porch like he had any right to breathe the same air as me. He wasn't as tall as I'd imagined, and up close, he looked more ordinary than the suave businessman I had built up in my head. But his smug expression was exactly as I'd pictured. "Jack," he said, his tone casual, like we were old friends. "Can we talk?" I didn't answer. My fist answered for me. It collided with his jaw, sending him stumbling back against the porch railing. He groaned, clutching his face. "Talk now?" I spat, my breath heavy. "Before I make sure you never talk again." Greg wiped blood from the corner of his mouth and straightened up, but the cockiness was gone. Good. I needed him scared. I needed him to know that the man he had messed with wasn't some weak, oblivious husband who would roll over and play dead. "Look, I'm not here to fight," he said, holding up his hands. "I'm here because Sherry's been blowing up my phone, and I figured you'd want to hear this face to face." "Oh, I want to hear a lot of things," I said. "Like why you thought you could screw my wife and get away with it." Greg flinched at my words, but he quickly recovered. "You don't understand. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Sherry, she was the one who pursued me." I laughed, a hollow sound that echoed into the empty backyard. "So it's her fault, huh? That's your excuse?" "No," he said quickly. "I'm just trying to give you context." "I don't need context, Greg," I snapped. "I need you out of my sight before I do something we'll both regret." Greg took a step back, but before he turned to leave, he said something that made my blood run cold. "You think this is over, but you don't know the half of it." He walked off, leaving me standing there with a storm brewing in my chest. What the hell did that mean? I slammed the door and locked it, then went back to the kitchen for another beer. I was going to need it, because if Greg Allen thought he could waltz into my life and leave cryptic warnings, he had another thing coming. I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. The beer buzzed through my veins like a second heartbeat, but it wasn't enough to dull the fire raging in my chest. I paced the living room, replaying Greg's parting words. "You don't know the half of it." What the hell did he mean? What else could there possibly be? I had seen the texts, the photos, and the video proof. I had torched my marriage in front of half the neighborhood. What could top that? The answer came sooner than I expected. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. I snatched it up, expecting Sherry. But it wasn't her, it was a blocked number. I debated ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hello, Jack Meyer," a woman's voice said, smooth but sharp, like a blade hidden in silk. "This is Deborah Whitaker." I nearly dropped the phone. Deborah, Sherry's mother. The woman who had hated me since the day we got engaged. "What do you want, Deborah?" I asked, my patience wearing thin. Her tone was ice cold. "I want to have a little chat, dear. I'm at the Blue Creek Diner. I suggest you join me. Now." I should have told her to shove it and hung up. But something in her voice made my fingers tighten around the phone. She wasn't here to make small talk. If she'd come all the way to my town, she had a reason. I grabbed my jacket and headed out the door. The Blue Creek Diner was a hole-in-the-wall spot where locals gathered for greasy breakfast food and bottomless coffee. Deborah looked out of place, sitting in one of the cracked vinyl booths with her perfectly manicured nails tapping against a cup of tea. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her designer coat screamed money in a way that clashed with the smell of bacon and burnt toast. As soon as I slid into the booth, she sized me up like she was appraising a piece of furniture she didn't want but might tolerate if it came at a discount. "You've really made a mess of things, haven't you?" she said, her lips curling into a smug smile. I leaned back and crossed my arms. "Cut the crap, Deborah. What do you want?" She stirred her tea, the spoon clinking against the ceramic cup in a slow, deliberate rhythm. "I'm here to make you an offer." I laughed bitterly. What could you possibly offer me that I'd want? Her eyes locked onto mine, and suddenly, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Your freedom." I didn't reply, but my fingers twitched against the table. "I know about the embezzlement," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but it hit me like a punch to the gut. "I know that Sherry funneled money from your business to fund her little extracurricular activities. Hotels, jewelry, gifts, you name it." My heart stopped. I had suspected Sherry had spent some of our money. Sure, but embezzling from the business? That was next-level betrayal. Deborah leaned in, her smile widening as she watched the color drain from my face. "And if you think the police won't be interested in hearing about it, you're delusional." I gritted my teeth. "You're bluffing." Her hand slid across the table, producing a folder that she pushed toward me. I hesitated before opening it, but when I did, my stomach twisted into knots. Bank statements, wire transfers, invoices. Sherry had left a trail a mile wide. Deborah had everything. "I could ruin you, Jack," she said, her voice soft but deadly. "Your business, your reputation, everything you've built. One phone call, and the police will be on your doorstep." I closed the folder, my hands trembling. "What do you want?" Deborah sat back, satisfied. "I want you to forgive my daughter, publicly. I want you to go on record saying you overreacted, that you're willing to give her a second chance." She smirked. "And I want you to take her back." My jaw clenched. "You're insane if you think I'd take her back after what she did." Deborah shrugged. "Then I guess you better get a good lawyer. Because once the cops get involved, you won't just lose Sherry, you'll lose everything." I wanted to reach across the table and wipe that smug smile off her face. But instead, I stood up, shoving the folder back at her. "I'm not playing your game, Deborah. If you think you can bully me into submission, you've underestimated me." She didn't flinch. "You have 48 hours to reconsider. After that, I make the call." I walked out of the diner, the cold air slapping me in the face as I tried to clear my head. My mind was spinning, torn between rage and panic. I knew Deborah wasn't bluffing. If she had those documents, the cops wouldn't care about Sherry's infidelity. They'd care about the stolen money. I climbed into my truck and gripped the steering wheel, breathing hard. Deborah thought she had me cornered, but she didn't know I had plans of my own. If Sherry and her mother wanted to play dirty, then so be it. Because the truth was, I wasn't just fighting for revenge anymore. I was fighting for survival. By the time I got home, it was dark. The house felt eerily quiet, like it was holding its breath, waiting for the next bomb to drop. I flicked on the lights, grabbed another beer, and sank into the couch. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of Deborah's ultimatum. Forgive Sherry? Pretend everything was fine and let her walk back into my life like she hadn't detonated our marriage? Over my dead body. But the embezzlement, that was a problem I couldn't ignore. If Deborah handed over those documents, the cops wouldn't waste time figuring out who the real criminal was. My name was tied to every account, every withdrawal. Even if Sherry had done it behind my back, proving it would be a nightmare. And Deborah knew it. I needed a plan. Fast. I was halfway through my beer when my phone buzzed. I groaned, expecting another blocked number. But when I checked the screen, it was an unfamiliar local number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Jack! A woman's voice said hesitantly. It's Paige, Sherry's sister. My grip on the phone tightened. Paige and I weren't exactly close, but she'd always been the black sheep of the family, the one who didn't buy into Deborah's manipulative games. I hadn't heard from her in years. What do you want, Paige? I asked, not in the mood for more family drama. There was a pause on the other end before she said, I know what Deborah's doing, and I want to help you. I sat up straighter. Why would you help me? Because I hate her just as much as you do, Paige said, her voice darkening. And Sherry deserves to suffer for what she did. But if you go down for the embezzlement, they win. I'm not about to let that happen. I hesitated. Could I trust her? What do you know? Meet me at the old pier, down by Harbor Point, she said. I'll explain everything. I glanced at the clock. It was nearly 11 p.m. Why the pier? Because it's the only place Deborah's spies won't find us, Paige replied. You think she doesn't have people watching you? She does. That didn't surprise me. Deborah was the type to cover every angle. Fine, I said. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The pier was deserted, the wooden planks creaking under my boots as I walked toward the dim glow of a cigarette. Paige leaned against the railing, exhaling smoke into the cold night air. Her short black hair was windswept, and she wore a leather jacket that looked like it had seen better days. I was starting to think you wouldn't show, she said, flicking her cigarette into the water below. You said you had answers, I replied, crossing my arms. Start talking. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through it before handing it to me. Take a look at this. I swiped through the photos on her screen, my breath catching as I realized what I was looking at. Screenshots of text messages between Sherry and Greg. But these weren't just flirty messages, they were financial ones. Transfers, payments, discussions about hiding the money trail. This proves it, I whispered, the pieces clicking together. Sherry wasn't just embezzling. She was working with Greg to launder the money. Paige nodded. Greg was in deeper than you think. He was using your money to cover up losses at his company. Sherry was the perfect accomplice. She had access to your accounts and knew how to cover her tracks just enough to keep you in the dark. Rage boiled in my chest, but Paige wasn't finished. Deborah knows about the laundering too, she said. But she won't hand over everything to the cops unless you refuse her offer. She's trying to protect Sherry and Greg because if this gets out, Greg's company will implode, and Sherry will be dragged down with it. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. So what's your angle, Paige? Why are you helping me? Her lips curved into a bitter smile. Because I've been waiting for years to watch Deborah's little empire burn. And because I know something she doesn't. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her jacket and handed it to me. It was a bank statement, one I hadn't seen before. My eyes scanned the numbers and then I saw it. A secret account in Sherry's name, holding over $150,000. Money that had been siphoned off before Greg ever got his hands on it. She's been double-crossing him, Paige said, lighting another cigarette. She's been skimming money and stashing it away for herself. Greg doesn't know, and neither does Deborah. But you do. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. If I expose this account, I can pin the embezzlement on her. Exactly, Paige said, exhaling smoke. And once you do, Greg and Deborah won't be able to touch you. Sherry will take the fall and you'll walk away clean. I stared out at the dark water, my mind racing. This was the break I needed, the leverage to turn the tables. But it wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about making sure they all paid for what they'd done. Thanks, Paige, I said, slipping the paper into my jacket. Don't thank me yet, she said, her voice softer now. This isn't over. They're going to fight back. And it's going to get ugly. I nodded. I'm ready. As I walked back to my truck, the cold night air cleared my head. I wasn't afraid of ugly. I had been living in it for months. And now I was ready to burn it all down. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. The weight of betrayal, anger, and fear still sat heavy on my chest. But now, I had something stronger. Leverage. Paige's revelations had changed everything. Sherry thought she was smart, skimming money and hiding it behind Greg's back. Deborah thought she had me cornered with her threats of exposing the embezzlement. But they didn't know what I knew now, and that made all the difference. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping black coffee as the sun rose over the neighborhood. The signs and furniture were still on the lawn, though someone had taken the kitchen table overnight. I hoped they enjoyed their free prize and the story that came with it. I pulled out my laptop and started working. The first thing I did was transfer every bit of business documentation I could find to an encrypted drive. Bank statements, payroll records, loan agreements, and anything else that might come back to haunt me. Then, I logged into the joint account Sherry and I shared. As expected, her last few withdrawals were from luxury boutiques and five-star hotels. But she hadn't touched the account since last week. Smart. She knew I'd be watching. But she didn't know I had access to her secret account now. I checked the balance. $152,327. Jesus. She really thought she could run away with this. I transferred screenshots of the account and transaction history to my encrypted drive. Evidence in case I needed to hit her where it hurt. Then came the hard part. I had to meet with someone I never thought I'd willingly call. Greg Allen. I found his contact info buried in my phone from a barbecue Sherry had insisted we attend a year ago. I remembered standing in Greg's backyard with a beer, watching him grill steaks while cracking jokes about how he worked too hard. The irony wasn't lost on me. I shot him a text. We need to talk. Alone. I know about the secret account. Let's meet at 2 p.m. at the abandoned warehouse on Pine Street. Don't bring anyone. It was a risky move, but I knew Greg well enough to know he'd take the bait. If Sherry had been stealing from him, he'd want answers. At exactly 2 p.m., I parked my truck in front of the old warehouse. The place was falling apart, its windows shattered, and graffiti-covered walls surrounded by overgrown weeds. The perfect spot for a conversation no one was supposed to hear. Greg's car pulled up 5 minutes later. He stepped out, still nursing the bruise on his jaw from when I'd clocked him the night before. His face was tense, and his eyes darted around, like he expected me to ambush him. Relax, I said, leaning against the hood of my truck. I'm not here to fight. Could have fooled me, he muttered, rubbing his jaw. I motioned toward the warehouse entrance. Let's go inside. We entered the dusty, dimly lit building, the sound of our footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. I stopped in the middle of the room and turned to face him. You've been played, Greg, I said, cutting straight to the point. Sherry's been skimming money off the top and stashing it in a secret account. I have proof. He didn't react right away, but I saw the flicker of something in his eyes, doubt, then anger. Bullshit. I pulled out my phone and showed him the screenshots Paige had given me. This is her account. Over $150,000 sitting there, taken from my business. She didn't just betray me, Greg. She betrayed you too. He stared at the screen, his jaw tightening. That bitch, he whispered. I trusted her. Yeah, well, welcome to the club, I said, slipping the phone back into my pocket. Now, here's what we're going to do. You're going to help me bring her down. We're going to expose her. pin the embezzlement on her, and walk away without a scratch. And why the hell would I help you? He asked, crossing his arms. Because if you don't, I said, stepping closer, I'll make sure the cops get every piece of evidence tying you to the laundering scheme. I'll take you down with her, Greg. And trust me, I won't lose sleep over it. He swallowed hard, realizing I wasn't bluffing. What do you want from me? Simple, I said. I need you to act like nothing's wrong. Go back to Sherry, keep playing along, and make sure she doesn't see this coming. I'll handle the rest. Greg exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. Fine. But once this is over, I'm done. I don't want anything to do with her or you. Deal, I said, extending my hand. He hesitated, then shook it. His grip was firm, but I could feel the tension in his fingers. He wasn't just angry, he was scared. Good. He should be. When I got back to the house, I saw Deborah's car parked outside. Perfect timing. I was ready for her. I walked inside to find her sitting in the living room, her legs crossed and a glass of wine in hand. She looked up and smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Changed your mind, have you? She asked sweetly. I sat down across from her, leaning back casually. Actually, I have. Her eyebrows lifted in surprise, but she quickly masked it. Good. I knew you'd come around. But I have conditions, I said, my voice steady. Sherry takes full responsibility for the embezzlement. Publicly. And you don't involve the cops. Deborah's smile faded. That's not how this works, Jack. Oh, but it is, I said, leaning forward. Because if you push me, I'll expose Sherry's secret account. The cops won't just come for me. They'll come for her. And Greg. And you. Her face went pale, and for the first time, she looked uncertain. You wouldn't dare. I smirked. Try me. Silence filled the room as she processed what I just said. I could see the gears turning in her head, trying to find a way to regain control. But there wasn't one. I had her exactly where I wanted her. Fine, she said finally, her voice cold. I'll talk to Sherry. But this isn't over. I stood up and walked to the door. Oh, it's over, Deborah. You just don't know it yet. As I stepped outside, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was winning. The next morning, I woke up feeling like a man who had finally taken control of his destiny. No more running, no more being backed into a corner. Sherry, Deborah, Greg. They were all pawns on my board now, and I was ready to make my final move. I spent the day laying the groundwork. I met with Paige again at a small cafe downtown, where she handed me a USB drive containing additional dirt on Sherry and Greg. Paige had dug deeper, finding even more transactions and shady deals that connected them. The more I saw, the more it became clear. They weren't just bad at hiding their crimes, they were sloppy. And that sloppiness was going to bury them. This is all the proof you'll need, Paige said, stirring her coffee. Once this goes public, it's game over for them. Thanks, Paige, I said, pocketing the drive. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Just promise me one thing, Jack. Don't let Deborah walk away unscathed. She's been pulling the strings for years, and she deserves to burn with the rest of them. Oh, she will, I assured her. That evening, I made a few phone calls. One to my lawyer, one to a reporter at the local news station, and one to a private investigator I'd hired last minute to dig into Greg's company. By the time I was done, I had set the wheels in motion for a public takedown no one would see coming. At 7 p.m., I texted Sherry. Meet me at the house. We need to talk. Her reply came quickly. On my way, I paced the living room, my heart pounding. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to unleash every ounce of anger and heartbreak I'd been holding in. But I couldn't afford to lose control now. Not when I was so close to ending this nightmare for good. Sherry arrived 10 minutes later, her eyes red and puffy. She'd been crying good. I wanted her to cry. Jack, she said, stepping inside. I'm so sorry. I never meant for things to go this far. I love you. I laughed bitterly. You love me? That's rich, Sherry. You loved me so much that you drained my business accounts and screwed Greg behind my back. Great way to show affection. She flinched, tears spilling down her cheeks. I made a mistake. I was stupid and selfish, but we can fix this. We can. I held up my hand, silencing her. No, we can't. You don't get to come back from this. Her lip trembled. But Deborah said. I don't care what your mother said. I snapped. This isn't her game anymore. It's mine. And you've already lost. I pulled out my phone and opened the folder containing the evidence Paige had given me. I shoved it in her face, scrolling through the screenshots of bank statements, texts, and wire transfers. Her face went pale. Where did you get this? Paige, I said, enjoying the flicker of betrayal in her eyes. Turns out your sister isn't as loyal as you thought. Sherry staggered backward, sinking onto the couch. Jack, please. I ignored her plea and continued. Here's how this is going to go. Tomorrow morning, I'm handing all of this over to the authorities. You'll be charged with embezzlement, money laundering, and fraud. And since Greg's name is all over these transactions, he's going down with you. Her eyes widened in horror. You can't do that. You'll be implicated too. I leaned in, my voice low and deadly. That's where you're wrong. I have enough evidence to prove that you acted without my knowledge. You're the one who funneled the money. You're the one who falsified the documents. I'm walking away clean. She sobbed, burying her face in her hands. Jack, I'm begging you. You should have thought about that before you screwed me over, I said, standing up. Pack your bags, Sherry. You've got until tomorrow to get out of my house. And don't think your mother can save you. She's next on my list. Sherry didn't move, paralyzed by the weight of what I just said. I left her there and walked outside, needing the cold night air to cool the fire inside me. At 9 p.m., I met Greg in the parking lot of a rundown motel on the edge of town. He looked like hell, disheveled, sweaty, and jumpy. Did you tell her? He asked nervously. Yeah, I said. She's done. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. What about me? I pulled out the USB drive Paige had given me. This has everything the authorities need to pin the laundering on Sherry. As long as you cooperate, you might get off with a slap on the wrist. Greg nodded, but his eyes betrayed his fear. I don't want to go to prison, Jack. Then don't give me a reason to send you there, I said, turning to leave. When I got home, Deborah was waiting for me. She sat in the living room, a glass of wine in hand, but the smugness was gone. She looked nervous. Good. Jack, she said, setting the glass down. Let's be civil. We can still make a deal. I chuckled darkly. You don't get to negotiate anymore, Deborah. I've got everything I need to destroy you, Sherry, and Greg. So here's my deal. You leave town and you don't come back. You don't contact me, and you sure as hell don't try to mess with my life again. If you do, I'll make sure you're dragged down with them. Her eyes flashed with anger, but she knew she was beaten. You're making a mistake. No, I said, walking to the door. I'm finally cleaning up yours. As I closed the door behind her, a weight lifted off my shoulders. I wasn't done yet, but the finish line was in sight. Tomorrow, everything would come crashing down, and I'd be the one standing on the ashes. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of wet grass as I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over the neighborhood. Today was the day everything fell apart for them. By 9 a.m., the wheels were already turning. I sat in my truck, parked just down the street, and watched as two black and white police cars pulled up in front of my house. Sherry, still in her pajamas, stumbled outside, confusion giving way to panic as the officers read her rights and cuffed her wrists. She screamed, begged, sobbed. I didn't flinch. Deborah's car was nowhere in sight. Good. She'd done the smart thing and left town. For once, she'd realized she wasn't the puppet master anymore. Greg was next. An unmarked police car pulled into his driveway just as he was stepping outside, suitcase in hand. Guess he thought he could run. Too bad. The officers didn't give him the chance. I leaned back in my seat, sipping my coffee, feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. By noon, it was all over the news. Local real estate agent and business owner charged in embezzlement and fraud scandal. Sherry's face flashed across the TV screen, followed by Greg's. Reporters speculated about jail time, plea deals, and ruined reputations. I turned off the TV and sat in the silence of my living room. The house felt different now, emptier but lighter, like the ghosts of betrayal had finally been exorcised. By 6 p.m., I was packed. The truck was loaded with my essentials. Clothes, tools, my dog Duke riding shotgun. I had no interest in sticking around to watch the fallout. This town held too many memories, and it was time to leave them behind. As I pulled onto the highway, I felt free. Not just from Sherry or Deborah or Greg, but from the version of myself who had once believed in perfect love and blind trust. That man was gone, and I didn't miss him. I didn't know where I was going yet, but for the first time in a long time, that didn't scare me. Let them burn in the ashes. I had my freedom, and that was more than enough.